I was reading my YouTube comments the other day, and I received a very interesting question that I thought I could perhaps provide a nuanced answer to, and it goes something like this. Do you like Western media just as much as Japanese media? Or do you simply think that Japanese media is better? Well, much like Libya, Japanese media is a land of contrasts, and I'm going to talk about how I feel about Japanese versus Western media in terms of television, movies, comic books, and video games. Sometimes Japanese media is better. So I'm now going to explain myself and my answer, starting out with television. It's going to start out with a big no. In television, Japanese television is terrible. It is awful. I never had cable myself when I lived in Japan for 8 years, but I did visit some people's homes that did, and whenever I watched TV in Japan, I was always like, why is this so terrible? Japan really doesn't have any prestige TV shows like we do in America. Because American TV is the best TV. Yes, UK television can be okay with its occasional Poirots, but no, Japanese TV is terrible, and I think I have figured out why. American television does have a lot of awful shows on it. That much is true. But American television also has things like The Sopranos, The Office, Parks and Recreation, these amazing sitcoms, excellent prestige TV that Japan just doesn't have. And why is that? Well, I think the big reason is because who is Japanese television targeted towards? Well, it's targeted towards the elderly, who are the only people who actually have time to watch an extended amount of television in Japan, or people who are coming home from their 16-hour workday. And do you really think after working 16 hours that someone really has the mental capacity to tune in to a very nuanced television show like perhaps Breaking Bad? No, I don't think so, and that's why Japanese television is terrible. And I'm going to tell you a particularly bad show that I watched once. There is a show, I forget what the name of it is, but basically it is about interviewing foreigners and seeing why they loved Japan so much that they ended up residing in Japan forever. And of course, it is what I would like to call a cultural jerk-off, where Japanese people can just see foreigners talking about how amazing Japan is. The one that I watched in particular was about a Belgian guy who lived north of Tokyo and is a violin maker. And he thought that Japan was so amazing that he would settle down in Japan. He married someone Japanese and he's got Japanese kids. Guess what? He didn't teach them his mother language. Instead, they only just speak Japanese. And oh, did the Japanese presenters who were, commentating on the show, did they just love that? Did they just love that someone foreign would come to Japan and become so Japanese himself that his kids would only speak Japanese? I found that offensive as a foreigner living in Japan, and it was just one of many examples of terrible Japanese TV, in addition to what you would call variety shows, where it's just people watching other people eat food and just go, oh, this food is so delicious. I don't want to watch people eat food. I want to eat food myself. I don't need someone else to tell me that the food is delicious. I will decide that on my own. We then move to an area that I think Japan is superior in, and that is comic books. Because let me tell you, I have tried to get into American comic books, the manga, if you will, of America. But it's very difficult. For one, because your options are very, very limited. I would say the only American comic books I like are Star Wars comic books. I'm a huge fan of things like Dark Empire or the Darth Vader series that's been recently coming out. Oh, excellent. But those are rare exceptions because I've tried reading superhero comics, and while they have been good, it is just too perplexing. When you see a character like Spider-Man, who's been around for the last 50 or 60 years or however long, where are you supposed to start? What are the good storylines? I have no idea. But then flip it around to Japanese manga, and you've got so many different genres that have been running for so long, but at least these manga are still in print, and you can just start out from the very first volume. You've got One Punch Man, you've got Deers, you've got Love Hina, you've got a series about a boxer, about a guy who's just trying to make his way in the field of boxing. You've got Sergeant Frog, which is about a frog-like alien who's trying to take over the planet. That thing's got like 60 volumes. So you've got so much content, but because it is so rigid and is so, very regimented that you can at least start from the very beginning and it's very accessible, I don't know where I'm supposed to start with Spider-Man. I don't know where I'm supposed to start with Batman. But if I want to read Sergeant Frog, I just start from number 1. Same goes for One Punch Man. Now, where's an area that Japan may be slightly deficient in? I want to say movies. There are very good Japanese movies out there. I would say the most recent one that I've watched was Shin Godzilla. Excellent, phenomenal film. When you see some of the animated films out there, like the Ghibli films or Your Name, there are some very good Japanese films out there. And that is, of course, because Japan, up until, I want to say, the early 2010s, Japan was the second biggest film industry in the world next to the United States. Although I think China has slightly superseded that in the last couple of years. But Japanese films, pretty good, but they are, I think, second only to American movies, simply because American movies are number 1 and have been since the dawn of film. American movies are so good, but I would say actually recently, I don't know if they're so good. When I look back on the movies that I've seen in the last little while, I actually just finished watching Mortal Kombat the other day. It was fine. I would say American movies are like a B- right now. If I had to grade them, if I had to give them a score. I don't know what B- actually means, but it's just showing my disappointment with American movies right now. We then come to games. This is the big one. Which do you think is better? American games, Western games, whatever you want to say, or Japanese games? I would, in general, say Japanese games are better. Some of my favorite franchises are Japanese. Probably my favorite franchise ever, Metal Gear, is Japanese, of course. But of course it's Japanese, but it's got all the Western influences because Kojima wanted to be a Western film director. But then I think Japanese games, I think their weakness is in strategy. I know there are some good Japanese strategy games out there, like Nobunaga's Ambition. I haven't played them yet, so I haven't experienced them. But Western strategy games, for whatever reason, I don't know why, Western strategy games are better. Like StarCraft, Warcraft, the Total War series, that is, to me, the pinnacle of video games. But in general, Japanese games are better, especially when it comes to RPGs. There are, of course, some good Western RPGs out there, like the original Dragon Age, I thought was top 10, very good. But of course, the weakest Final Fantasy, I feel, beats, the best Dragon Age or the best Mass Effect that's out there. Even though I, of course, like them all, but if you're gonna force me to choose a favorite, I'm gonna have to go with Japanese video games. I could go on and on about the differences between Japanese and Western media, and I know I've been focusing on just comparing Japanese with American media, but that's my home country, that's the media that I watch, and let's just face it, America is the cultural superpower of the world, so that's what I have to compare it to. There are, of course, going to be good television shows from around the world. There are going to be good comic books from other countries that are not Japan. There are going to be good video games, mostly from the UK. UK video games actually tend to be very good. I was actually just playing Turrican recently, and Turrican, oh my god, did that really open my eyes as to how good British video games could be. And then there is, of course, the biggest British video game of them all that we don't consider to be British, but Grand Theft Auto. But Grand Theft Auto 4 came out 8 years ago? And that's what it feels like. It was 8 years ago at this point. Are we ever going to see a Grand Theft Auto 6? No, I don't think so. That's my take on the differences between Japanese and Western media. It, of course, is going to depend upon your perspective, and people are free to disagree with me in the comments. I look forward to reading them. I've been your man out of Japan, Jay Contra. Thanks for watching. See you next time, and mahalo.